AskReddit. Pilots of Reddit, have you ever been a passenger on a plane and noticed something going wrong? Part 2. ppdashmel here. I was on a company flight back from Cancun a few years back. When we were about 30 to 45 minutes out from where the normal descent begins, we had a bout of severe turbulence, preceded by a sudden quietening of engine noise and that unmistakable yaw of sudden OEI. It wasn't turbulence either, just a straight-up rapid descent of about 4,000 feet. I follow along on commercial flights with my iPad and ForeFlight. Captain comes on and says we're starting our descent into Chicago way early and to sit down, buckle up, and do not get out of our seats due to the potential turbulence. We're on the rollout, and one of my co-workers' wives said, "Weird, there's all sorts of trucks along the runway." They were crash cars. The pilot really handled it well. This was Continental Airlines, and other than the initial "what the F," it was uneventful. Though I was pretty sure everything would be fine, I've done a number of single-engine approaches in a light twin. My wife did point out that I was breathing heavier than normal on final. For those equally as ignorant of pilot lingo as myself, Google has informed me that OEI means one engine inoperable, and I'm fairly sure pp-ASMEL is a kind of private pilot's license. Private pilot, airplane, single and multi-engine land, as opposed to seaplane. Yes, one time I was flying Space A to California from North Carolina. We taxied to the runway. We held till our turn. Upon turning out onto the runway, about a quart of hydro fluid leaked out of a hydro line wrapped in an old rag. Mentioned it to the aircrew. They responded, "Yeah, we know about it." Never leaked again the rest of the flight. Some duct tape will fix it. I'm not joking. They use a lot of duct tape. I'm a pilot's son, so not technically qualified here, but I was flying down to Perth sitting next to the airline's DFO, a family friend. I noticed that we were circling the airport for a long time on our descent, not like a holding pattern, and even as we approached the runway, it felt way too fast. Anyways, I asked the DFO if he thought we were pretty fast, and he said, "Yep, I don't think our flaps are working." We landed fine and spent a bit longer streaming down the runway, but the most amazing thing was that not one of the other passengers had any idea that there was a problem. It was great seeing the DFO was unfazed, knowing his fellas in the front were on top of it. Not a pilot, but an engineer. A friend of mine spotted frost on a wing prior to takeoff and pointed it out to the crew when they didn't de-ice. He was ignored. The flight proceeded, and he was given the gears by passengers seated nearby for causing panic for nothing. He spoke to the captain after the flight and was told it was perfectly safe. Turns out my buddy is a leading expert on aircraft icing. Long story short, the FAA got involved. I'm a private pilot. We were landing in Portland at night. I was looking out the window to watch what was going on, and I nearly got blinded by someone shooting a laser at the aircraft. I luckily was able to look away in time. I talked to the pilots after landing, and they said they were almost blinded too. They reported it to the airport police, but that's the last I've heard of it. I don't get why people do that. I assume it can end up causing crashes and stuff. Some genius tried doing that to a helicopter around here recently. They didn't notice what they aimed at was a police helicopter. The police helicopter wanted to play, which included dropping to 50 feet while pointing their spotlight at the kids who did it, and politely informing them that they could stay very still right where they were while the nearest police cruiser came by to pick them up to make an example out of them. Dust and similar things striking a cockpit window causes microscopic fissures. A laser striking that at a few hundred feet will cause the entire pane of glass to become a shining wall of glaring light, and will also be quite unkind to the pilot's night vision. Not a pilot, but I fly a lot, and one time I was next to a pilot in uniform that was catching a ride home. We hit some rough air on arrival, and I heard him go, "Uh-oh, we are coming in low." He then told me every now and then he jokes with passengers like that to freak them out. Similar situation. Nighttime, it's storming, bad turbulence, and the pilot catching a ride home was silently crying. A passenger asked what was wrong, and he apologized and said it was personal. Pretty scary and kind of surprised it didn't start a panic. Sounds like this is a cruel and hilarious inside joke for pilots. Actually, after I became a commercial pilot, I'm a lot more paranoid when flying. I know about too much stuff that could go wrong. One time, I was absolutely positive the plane was going to stall after takeoff. I could feel the wing drop, but they recovered and we were thrown quite a bit around, so in retrospect, it was most likely just very heavy turbulence, but I was really nervous. I had that one happen to me literally yesterday on a flight from Memphis to Salt Lake City. Takeoff seemed a bit rushed, engines gunning, and about 10 seconds off the ground, he's pitched way up, and I feel a quick drop in G's. I tell turbulence to come at me, bro, all the time, but that one nearly gave me a heart attack. It's all the context in your head. He seems dangerously close to stalling right now. Body starts getting lighter. Leaving a small town in Mexico on a plane, noticed that every third screw rivet was missing from the wing I was sitting next to. I could see the rust circles where they had been. We were literally taxiing to take off, and I was traveling with a white-knuckled flyer. Popped a pint of tequila and took a long, hard pull off it and crossed my fingers. Pilot here. I related this story on another post, but it fits here. While still a student pilot, I was riding along in the back of a Cessna 172 while another student practiced landings in the pattern with the instructor. I was looking around and checking things out when I looked directly behind us and saw a twin-engine Aero Commander freighter coming hard right at us. I quickly grabbed the instructor by the shoulder to point out the other plane, and he immediately grabbed the microphone and screamed something into it. The other aircraft was so close that I watched the pilot of the Commander quickly look up from whatever he focused on and could see the look of shock on his face as he pushed the aircraft over into a quick descent. His aircraft went directly under ours at a distance that could not have been more than 50 feet. It was so close I honestly expected to feel an impact. The student flying the aircraft never saw a thing and was completely unaware of how close he had come to getting taken out from behind. Still freaks me out a bit thinking about how close we came. Similar story. I was learning to fly in a Piper Archer III. The instructor and I were cruising, and when I looked out the window, I see this guy in a Cessna climbing altitude and heading practically straight for us. Only thing to do was to climb and get out of the way. Interesting experience to say the least. Flew AWACSs in the Air Force, which is essentially a Boeing 707. We're not supposed to bank more than a certain amount. Amount is classified, sorry, because of the radar dome on top of the aircraft. I was a passenger flying on a 737, flying into Villahermosa, Mexico, and final apparently aims you straight between two very close together mountains. The pilot banked way more than I was used to, picked up the glide slope between these peaks, and I admit it freaked me out. "What's he doing?" I cried. I was traveling with an AWACS navigator who also looked at me all crazy eyes and grabbed at the armrests. But it was fine for this aircraft. It just would have been all out of limits for mine. Oh yeah, we notice. One thing I always notice is how a pilot transitions through 10,000 feet. Since there is a speed limit of 250 knots below 10,000 feet, when you climb through 10,000, you lower the nose to pick up speed. The autopilot has been varying the aircraft pitch to maintain 250 knots, and if you just ask it to maintain a higher speed, it will aggressively level out, leaving you with that light feeling in your stomach. The good pilots will smoothly transition using different flight modes, but I can always tell the sloppy ones. It was one of those days when I felt the sloppy pilots on a climb out from Atlanta. I was in the very last row chatting with the flight attendants who sat in the aisle between the last two seats. I had been out of flying for a year or so I was reminiscing and having a nice chat. On a descent into Toronto, the captain mentioned it would be a bumpy ride in. The first time we shot the approach, I was scared. It wasn't the bumps that worried me, it was how wild the pilots were handling it with the engine power. You get a feeling when you've flown for so long, and the sounds of the airplane work on your subconscious. I would feel the airplane rise as we hit a gust, and they would immediately pull the power. Then, they would apply full power on the back end of the gust. That's where sloppy technique meets unsafe technique for me. After the second approach, I mentioned to the flight attendant that we'll probably spend the night in Detroit. It made no sense to her, but sure enough, we got over the runway, full power, and off we go again. This time though, we keep climbing and heading west. You notice these type of things. The airplane is cleaned up all the way, and I told the flight attendant to get ready for some questions. How did I know we'd divert to Detroit and not a closer airport such as Ottawa or Buffalo? Firstly, the front had already passed through Detroit, so we wouldn't chance it hitting us again. But mostly, I remember a key piece of information at the beginning of the flight. The captain mentioned this was a Detroit flight crew. Detroit was home. Sure enough, the captain announces we'll be diverting into Detroit. The flight attendant calmly walks up to me with a smile on her face and says, "What do I do?" I said what any pilot stuck in the back of an aircraft while two yahoos, whose confidence I have in their ability is nil, had my life in their hands. Open the liquor cabinet. The approach into Detroit was still sloppy, but not as rough, and we arrived without any further issues. As I was walking out, I snuck a peek at the remaining fuel on board. Typically, we'd land with 3,000 pounds, and the lowest I ever saw myself was 2,200 pounds. This fuel gauge read 1,500 pounds. How many mini bottles of booze can you throw back on a flight between Toronto and Detroit? The answer is 5.